Hey everybody! Today I'm going to show you two different ways to make fun sort of masonry style textures like you see here. The first one I'm going to do is a very simple technique that you can do with the chisel tip of OLO markers. So if you are a card maker, you might be the most used to using the brush tip, which is what I'm using here, just to coat a piece of paper with a dark blue. Usually we are used to coloring images with these brush tips because we color typically smaller images, and a lot of times the chisel tips are a way to cover a large amount of space very quickly. But in this video, I want to show you just some of the unique textures that you can get with the chisel tip, both with sort of lifting color and with putting color down. So for the first section of the video, I will be showing you how to make stonework or brick textures by lifting with the 0 marker and a chisel tip. So just choose a color that you like. You'll want it to be fairly dark, like a mid-tone to dark tone marker, and just cover a card front or whatever little die cut that you want to have the brick texture on with that solid color. Now I'm putting down 2 layers here because I do want kind of the grout in between the bricks to be a little bit darker color. And when we get into the second part of the video, I'm actually going to be doing the opposite of that, and I'll have the mortar be a lighter color. So you'll have 2 different options for how to do this. So now I have the chisel tip. You can see how this is shaped on my 0 marker. You can put a brush tip on one end and a chisel tip on the other, which is typically what I do. And then you can get 2 different kinds of textures, but this is very easy to do. So let me show you how you get started. You can work in a straight line and just put the flat end of the chisel tip down and let it create the shape of the marker on this blue background. You can also use the tip, as I did in the second row, to make smaller, skinnier little stones, basically. So if you can imagine like an English stone wall, you can make smaller and larger stones by lifting that color. Here I'm using the very tip just to touch down the smallest portion of the chisel tip to touch down and make teeny little stones. So if you can imagine somebody filling in with larger stones and smaller stones, like on a limestone wall, that's what this would look like. And if you sort of skip the coloring a little bit, each one of those stones is textured versus you holding that marker down for a long time to get a smoother look like I am with the larger bricks or stones. So I'm going to mix this bottom part because this is actually going to be the ground for my image and not kind of a backdrop wall that I'll be creating. So for the rest of the pattern, I will just be repeating these kind of long strokes where I'm sort of holding the marker down just a little bit. Now, personally, I think the beauty of this technique is the little bit of imperfection that you can get when you're trying to make a straight line. Anybody who's ever made a poster as a child knows that straight lines are very hard to do, but you can see that every now and then I'll have a little bit extra spacing between these. It is hard to do a straight line by hand, but if you want them to be perfect, you can line that chisel tip up against the side of a ruler if you want them to be perfectly straight. For my card, I'm going for sort of a moonlit alley kind of mood, as you saw in the finished card at the beginning of the video. Sort of if you can imagine that little bear sitting in an alley at night on kind of a rough backdrop, that's what I'm going to go for here. But like I said, the edge, since it's a straight edge on the chisel tip, you can definitely line it up against cardstock or a ruler if you want these to be perfectly straight. Now, the only thing that I like to do when I'm doing a repeated pattern, and you'll see this in the second half of the video as well, is once you have one of these rows down, when you go to do the next row, you want to line up your brick across the span of the gaps in the previous row. So if you look at these bricks, they're offset just a little bit, and one brick is covering up a gap between two bricks in the previous row, if that makes sense. That keeps it from all of the bricks just being stacked up in lines, which would be a very unnatural look, and it's not the way that masonry looks at all. So that's just a very simple tip for sort of offsetting any kind of stone and masonry. And we're going to do 3 different kinds actually, because I'm going to do 2 different kinds in this video. And then I'm probably going to show you a third in a live a little bit later this month. But this is a very quick and easy way to get kind of an architectural texture across any size piece of paper that you have. And it doesn't take long. This is not sped up very much, this process. So once you have the ink down in the first layer, this goes very, very quickly. And miraculously, that last row is perfectly sized for my last row of bricks. So here's what this looks like. You can see all the different kinds of textures, the skinny ones that I did with the tip up here at the top, that have a totally different look if you want to just put that chisel on its edge. And then these kind of get a rounded look as you taper off that stroke when you're pulling the marker away from the paper. They're just very fun. And then you get that hard edge from the zero marker pushing that ink away, which sort of defines all those little stones and makes them seem really, really 3D. So for this next section, I'm going to show you the background process before we do the masonry part of the video. First, I am just creating a night sky by ink blending the card panel that I'm going to be working on. This is going to be a Christmas card, and I'm going to build a chimney out of the little bricks. We're also going to use the chisel tip of the marker for that, but first I have to have a night sky. This entire card is based on the opening sequence to Christmas Vacation. If you know that little cartoon, if you have it memorized because you've watched that movie every year for, 40 years, like I have, then you have that sequence memorized, and that's what I'm going for in this card. So to begin with, I'm putting prize ribbon ink all over, so in a way, it's sort of like the first part of this video. And then I'm going to come in with wilted violet because I just think that kind of a violet-y blue night sky is more interesting than just a blue night sky. So I will cover this all up, and then we are going to create some stars before we put our little brick chimney down. So once this is all covered up, you can see that it just kind of makes it a more interesting blue. It's not that it really makes it super purpley on top, it just makes it a really pretty blue violet. And I guess it is blue violet, technically. So that is our background. I'm going to set up a couple of sheets of copy paper here, and they will serve as a splatter guard. And I'm just going to splatter some paint on these just very quickly to get some stars on there. This just takes a second, but it's such a fun touch on a card. And I'll set that aside to dry. So now I'll put my little Santa together. This is super easy because each of the pieces is meant to be a separate color. So you can just cut these out of colored cardstock and they're basically done and ready to go. So I'm adding a little bit of shading to the edge of Santa to make him look even chunkier than he already is. Make him look a little rounded and make it look like he can just barely squeeze down that chimney if he can at all. So this is just a little bit darker red than the cardstock, but it adds a lot of dimension. Other than that, there's no coloring to be done. The rest of this is just assembly. So I will use my precision glue press to just add these little tiny pieces. So this is the bottom part of his, I guess it's a uniform. I was gonna say coat, but this is the official Santa uniform. And then I will do the same for the other little elements. There's boots that have a little bit of fur on them, so I'll just put a tiny bit of glue on there. And then we'll add the little bits of fur on the top. The black buttons on his uniform, I wasn't even sure if they were going to show after I did my DIY chimney. So I cut them out of black, but I'm not going to put them on the uniform yet because I'm not sure if we'll even see them. So I will just wait on that. So this is pretty simple. Now I hand cut a little bit of snow for the top of the chimney, and I am putting my warm gray 1 marker with the chisel tip together with my O 2.7 marker with the chisel tip, and I am going to build my chimney. So I wanted the grout to be the warm gray color. So I'm coloring the entire chimney piece with the warm gray. So no matter where my bricks are, what's going to show through is just this light sort of putty color. And that's going to be the mortar in between my bricks. So you don't have to worry about getting this super even. It's just going to be a color that shows through your bricks. But I do put down 2 layers of this on the chimney. Now I love that I can just kind of build my markers for the experience. So I have these 2 markers together on 1 marker, and then I can put them back later on. But I'm following a similar procedure to lay down bricks with the side of the chisel marker, just the natural shape of the bottom of that nib. But I'm just drawing a solid line that's square on the ends instead of sort of tapering them like I did on the brick that was in the past segment. And I'm offsetting, just like I told you, where I start a brick below the seam for the previous row. So that means I'm usually finishing the end pieces last because I want to start my next row of bricks by spanning that gap between 2 of the bricks in a prior row. I, again, think it's more charming if these aren't super perfect, but you can spend the time to make them perfect if you want to. Okay, now once this is done, so it already looks like bricks. So you have the mortar, you have the little bricks with your chisel tip, and that's perfectly neat and cute. But I'm going to use a darker marker, the OR 3.7, also in the chisel tip because I want a very strong line. And I'm going to just put shading around the left side and the bottom side and sometimes the top side of each brick. Now I got the brush tip out. Also, this one has a brush tip on one side and a chisel tip on the other in case I wanted to do any little dots. I end up deciding I'm not going to do that because I like this strong line that I get with the tip of this chisel tip marker. I think it looks kind of architectural, like an architectural drawing, and I don't really want to soften that down too much. I am going to add some highlighting, but I like this little L shape on each of the bricks that's very easy to do with that finer point of the chisel tip marker. The brush marker would have a more rounded shape, and I like this more angular shape that you get with the chisel tip. So this is pretty quick to do this on each of these bricks, and look how much dimension it adds. You can do a second layer if you want to darken those down, but they already look so much more dimensional. So just a quick little second layer will darken them up just a little bit. Or you could just go 1 shade darker. I kind of like them to be pretty similar because I think it makes the shading more subtle. And when you're just looking at it from the distance that you would look at a card from, I think that it looks very, very dimensional without just a huge amount of contrast between those 2 shades. I think it looks really good. And then you can just do random little highlights. I just do little scratchy marks with a white gel pen. You could do dots here if you wanted to. I just kind of swipe the gel pen around. You know how bricks have those little defects where sometimes you can see a lighter color? That's what I'm going for. So do something a little bit different on every brick. If it's the same on every brick, it's going to look kind of unnatural. And there you go. That is such a cute little chimney for this guy to be stuck in. So I'll take my little snow cap. I just cut this a little bit wider, just a little rectangle, a little bit wider, and then hand cut the curves on it so that it looks like snow. Now, to me, to fit this onto the card, I am going to have to stick him a little bit farther into the chimney. That is going to cover up those buttons, so I'm glad I didn't spend the time doing that. Look how cute that is. That looks just like Christmas Vacation. So much fun. Santa stuck in the chimney. It doesn't get any cuter than that. So here is the finished card, and we will revisit this card with the brick, stone, wall, and ground. Thanks so much for watching.